Hello and welcome to the Mac Basement. This is a quick introduction to my brand newly added 2006 Mac Pro. So this is one of Apple's final machines to transition over to the Intel architecture. It replaces the Power Mac G5, and my particular model includes two dual-core Xeon processors for a total of 4 cores. Mine has 7 gigs of error-correcting memory. It has a 240 gigabyte SSD drive, which did not ship with it originally. It also includes an ATA Radeon 5770 graphics card, which also did not ship with it originally. It's an evolution of the Power Mac G5 design, so it uses the same metal aluminum case, but it adds another disk drive. The G5 only had one disk drive, and it adds some slightly different ports at the front, and we'll do a comparison later on. But it functions in roughly the same way. Internals are a little bit mixed up, that's all. Let's take a tour of the machine from the front. So as I said at the top, we have the 2 drive bays. The top drive is a DVD writing super drive. The second bay is empty. And then if we go to the front panel here, which is similar to the front panel that's on the G5, but it's got a few more ports in it this time, we have power button, headphones, 2 USB 2 ports, FireWire 400 and FireWire 800. Moving to the back, we have all the good stuff. This is where it differs from the G5 as well, in the placement of the main fan and the power adapter port, but we'll talk about those in a minute. So we've got 5 PCI slots here. The graphics card takes up 2, and this particular card, which as I said earlier is an upgrade, has 1 DVI port and 2 mini display ports. We've got 3 more USB 2 ports out here, another FireWire 400 and 800, 2 optical audio ports, 1 for in, 1 for out, analog audio in and out, and dual Ethernet, which is pretty cool. And then we have the flippy switch that opens it up. Now, similar to the G4, you can open it up easily, but it doesn't open in the same way as the G4. It doesn't have a nice fold-out door. It just has a panel that comes off, which is the same design as the G5. All right, we're going to open it up and see what happens here. So I'm going to flip the switch. That's going to unlock the panel, which then pops right off. Reveal the inside. And it's kind of cool. It's got little instructions about how to insert the memory here. Shows you what's what on the inside. So what do we have? Well, as I said, we have the drives up here, which are locked down a little bit. These don't just pop out. There's a little unscrewing that needs to happen in there, but you can get to the drives that way. You've got your PCI slots right there. These are actually memory boards down here, which is interesting. So if I expel the static electricity from myself, you use these little tabs to pull out the board, which I, of course, can't do. There we go. You slide the circuit board out, and the memory sits on the circuit board in regular DIMM slots like you're used to. So you would, pop these little levers, pull them out, but they're these mega pieces of memory with heat sinks on them. I mean, they're reminiscent of what you'd see in a gaming PC. They're huge. And then those are actually mounted inside those slots there. And then the CPU is actually right here. These are the 2 Xeon CPUs. We have some casing, some for the fans, and then of course my SSD that came with it that is not mounted in any way, shape, or form, so it's just kind of dangling. I'm going to fix that. This is the graphics card. And then the other neat thing about it is that if this was a fully complete Mac, it would have 4 of these going across the sides, but this is where the drives are mounted. So you would mount the drives on this, and then you just slide it in. Ta-da, your drive's plugged in. So it's a cool little Appleism. So that's a quick tour of the insides. So for contrast, this is my early 2005 dual Power Mac G5. Now this was released about a year before the Mac Pro, this particular model. The original Power Mac G5, this original aluminum design, was released in 2003. My model has 2 single-core 2 gigahertz G5 CPUs in it. And you can see the internal layout is very, very different between what the G5 has and what the Mac Pro has. Like, everything's in a different place. And it starts with kind of this thing. Apple was very proud of the cooling of the G5, and they had these thermal zones, which were sealed off by this big plastic piece. So you take this out to do your upgrades. It's very obvious where the CPUs are. This entire block is for 2 G5 CPUs. Huge differences from the Mac Pro, though. There's only room for 1 drive up top instead of 2. The hard drives actually go up here, so there's only room for 2 drive bays. And then below that, you've got your 4 PCI card slots, and you've got a fan, and the speaker is right here. And then you get down here and you've got 2 more fans. So in order to replace the memory, you actually have to pull this fan unit out. So it slides out. It's got 2 fans in it. And then your memory goes right there on the board. So no separate boards for the memory. They just go right on the logic board like any other memory would. This humongous area for the G5 CPU. And if this tells you anything about why Apple switched from the PowerPC CPU over to Intel, this entire block is dedicated to the CPU, 2 CPUs, and the cooling for them, versus this little sliver on the Mac Pro. Not only is it the same number of CPUs, but each of the CPUs has twice as many cores. So you've got 4 cores in this machine, 2 cores in this machine, and look at all the extra space you have. You've got a better layout for your drives. You've got more storage capacity, twice the number of drive bays in terms of internal storage, twice the number of bays in terms of external storage, CD drives, an extra PCI slot, pretty cool. Now, I like the G5 because you can take stuff out of it. That's pretty neat. But in terms of efficiency, the Mac Pro is far, far, far more efficient. And it's the exact same case design. Look at those. Exactly the same case design on the outside. Well, almost exactly. Another view of the twins from the outside. Again, look, they're exactly the same in terms of their overall shape. My Mac Pro is on the left. It is a little bit dented. I have to hammer out some of that stuff. It must have gotten dropped. But I mean, otherwise, same thing. You're looking at the same doors that I just had down to show the insides. Here they are again from the front. And as I said again, the case design is the same. The layout is different. So the G5 on the right only has 1 CD drive. G5 on the left has 2 optical drive slots. The slots themselves for the drive to open are a little bit narrower, but otherwise the same. And even the front panel. I mean, I think Apple was just all about doubling things on the Mac Pro because they have twice the number of USB ports and twice the number of FireWire ports, including FireWire 800 on the Pro, versus a single USB and a single FireWire on the G5. The back, of course, is where things get very, very different due to the extremely different layout on the inside. So you've got the G5 on the right and the Mac Pro on the left, and if you see on the right here, everything's in a totally different spot. The power plug is at the top on the Mac Pro. It's at the bottom on the G5. The G5 has 2 fans in the back. The Mac Pro only has 1, although it's a little bit bigger. The location of the drive bays is shifted down on the Mac Pro, whereas it's on top on the G5. The ports are organized differently, so they're in a rectangular block on the Mac Pro, whereas on the G5 they're in a big long strip. And the numbers are a little bit more similar. You've got dual Ethernet ports on both. You've got FireWire 800 on both, FireWire 400 on both, optical audio in and out, analog audio in and out, and 3 USB 2 ports on both. So the number of ports is the same, but the layout is very different. And even the lever to open the sides in a different place. And the G5 has this weird plastic piece on the back, and that's actually the airport antenna, which then the Mac Pro did not have. The Mac Pro was such a big improvement over the Power Mac G5 that before I ended my little tour, I wanted to do a quick performance comparison of the two. So I've got a little test here set up with Lightroom. So I've got Lightroom 2 installed, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to import 100 raw images taken on my Nikon D70, D2, and D1. So they're, SLRs of that era. I'm just going to time how long it takes for those to import into Lightroom. In terms of settings, I have set my camera raw cache to a gig, and I have set my catalog to generate the highest size previews at the highest quality, and that'll guarantee that it takes a little while to churn through these. I will set the same exact settings on the Power Mac G5. I will time them and we'll compare. I'm going to make sure to choose 1-to-1 previews, and I'm going to start the import. Now the initial import of the images is coming off of a USB 2 stick, which I will use on the G5. It's probably going to go pretty fast because these are being copied over to an SSD, but the real work comes when we start processing and generating the previews. So you'll see up here, we got 5 out of 100 previews being generated right now. CPUs are starting to kick up. The thing that I'm not hearing so far is any sort of fan noise. This Mac Pro is nice and quiet, nice and cool. We're at about 1 minute and 15 seconds. At that rate, it'll take about 5 minutes to import all these and generate the previews. Halfway through, 2 minutes, 17 seconds. Lightroom 2.0 is the latest version of Lightroom I could find that would run on both an Intel Mac and a PowerPC Mac, and support the cameras that I'm using. So this is not a 64-bit native process. It may be a little faster in that case, but not sure. And if we look at memory it's using, about a gig. Plenty of memory free here. CPUs are pretty well used up, so it's taking good advantage of the 4 cores available to it. And we're done. On this Power Mac G5, we are running macOS 10.5.8, which is the latest version that Power Macs could ever run. And I have dual 2 gigahertz G5 processors in here and 7 gigs of RAM. So we have not only slower processors, but I have only 2 cores at my disposal instead of 4. Still 2 physical CPUs, but only 1 core per. All right, here we go with the Power Mac G5. So I've got Activity Monitor up in the bottom. I've got Lightroom 2.0 installed with the same exact catalog settings, high quality previews. We are going to import the same photos from this thumb drive with the same settings. We're going to say full previews, and go. So the actual file import takes about the same amount of time because I'm actually not copying them over to the media. So there's no files to copy. The previews, however, are being written to the spinning hard disk that's in this PowerMac G5. So that is potentially a limiting factor here, but if you look, the two CPUs are being used quite considerably, just like they were in the case of the Mac Pro. Interesting that on the PowerMac G5, we've got more threads running. I think on the Mac Pro there were like 18 or 19 threads. There's 25 here, which is interesting. Now in terms of sound, I think overall the PowerMac G5 at idle is a little bit louder than the Mac Pro, but it's not that much louder, and it hasn't gotten noticeably louder as it's been importing. Up to 1:30, and we're 14 pictures out of 100, about 25% of the way at 2.5 minutes. And Lightroom's using roughly the same amount of memory as it was on the Mac Pro, a little bit less. On the Mac Pro it was using almost a gig. Here it's using like 8 to 900 megs. But Lightroom 2.0 is a universal app, so on an Intel Mac it runs Intel native code, on a PowerPC Mac it runs PowerPC native code. We're about halfway through at 4 minutes 30 seconds, trending to finish in about 9 minutes total. And if we're curious if we are being limited by the disk, I would say we're CPU limited because the disk activity is not constant. So if you look at the written data in red there, that's not a constant line. It's spiking up and down, which means we're passing off between CPU, disk, CPU, disk. At least that's how I would interpret that graph. So I don't think the fact that we have a spinning hard drive is actually the limiting factor here. I mean, the files it's writing out, the raw files are 10, 12 megs a piece. So I don't think an SSD would really give us much more improvement in performance. I think we're very CPU bound. I mean, you see these two pegged. The other indicator of being disk bound is that the CPUs would be idle for periods of time, and they're never idle. They're not always completely taxed, but they're always being used. Done in 8 minutes and 58 seconds. So let's summarize the results. For our Lightroom 2 import of 100 raw images at high quality, the Mac Pro with its 4 cores completed the task in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. The G5 with its 2 cores completed the task in 8 minutes and 58 seconds. That means the Mac Pro was twice as fast. The results of this benchmark clearly show the Mac Pro is the winner at twice the speed, but it has twice the number of cores. You see, Intel CPUs weren't much faster than the G5. Raw speed wasn't the issue. Apple switched to Intel due to heat, power usage, and scaling. The G5 never made it to 3 GHz like Steve Jobs promised in 2003, and it never made it into a PowerBook either because it ran too hot. Even the quad-core G5 needed liquid cooling so that it basically wouldn't melt. With twice the cores running at a 33% faster clock speed, it's no wonder the Mac Pro beats out a G5. The reason that Apple could double the number of cores in the same case was because Intel CPUs used significantly less power and generated less heat than the G5. This allowed Apple to introduce a machine at the same price as the previous year's G5 with twice the performance. A year after that, Apple offered an 8-core model, something the G5 never achieved. Not bad. This little bit of history is particularly interesting today, as Apple announced on June 22nd of this year, 2020, that it will once again be switching processor architectures. This time from Intel, which has hit a performance and power efficiency ceiling, to Apple's own CPUs, based on the A-series chips in the iPhone and iPad. It'll be interesting to see if Apple can once again deliver double the performance year over year.